My name's Zoe. I'm 36 years old. And I never thought my own brother would betray me in the middle of a courtroom. During my divorce trial, when I needed support the most, he laughed at my service and mocked the years I gave in uniform. But he didn't know the judge was about to turn everything upside down. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more family drama and stories of emotional courage. The gavel slammed against the wood, sharp enough to make me jump in my seat. My palms were already damp, but that sound, it made my heart race harder. I'd been in plenty of stressful situations in my life, but nothing prepared me for sitting in that courtroom, knowing my marriage was ending in front of strangers, lawyers, and a judge who held the fate of my children in his hands. The room smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, a mix I'd grown to associate with courthouses. Rows of benches creaked as people settled in, whispering to one another. Some were here for their own cases, some just waiting their turn. But for me, this wasn't just another hearing. This was my life, my family, my reputation, all of it hanging in the air like dust in a beam of light. My ex-husband, Ryan, sat on the opposite side of the room with his attorney, a woman in a navy suit who looked like she'd practiced her confident smile in the mirror 100 times. She tapped her pen rhythmically on the desk, as if the sound alone could intimidate me. Ryan leaned toward her, whispering something, and they both smirked. That smirk, the same one I used to brush off as just his personality, now made my stomach turn. And then there was my brother, Tyler. He wasn't sitting beside me, where brothers usually sit when you're fighting through the hardest battle of your life. No, he was right behind Ryan, on his side, close enough to whisper, close enough to sneer. When I first saw him there, I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe he just happened to walk in late and grabbed the first empty seat. But the moment he leaned forward close to Ryan and laughed at something whispered, I knew exactly where he stood. Not with me. Never with me. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't new. Tyler and I had been drifting apart for years. Ever since I joined the Army at 19, he made little digs about it, saying I'd taken the easy way out or run from real life. He'd never understood the long nights, the missed birthdays, or the way your body ached after drills. To him, my service was just a story, not a sacrifice. But I never thought he'd bring that mockery here, to this room, when everything was on the line. The judge cleared his throat, shuffling through a stack of papers, and began outlining the day's proceedings. My lawyer, Mr. Bennett, leaned toward me. Stay calm, Zoe, he whispered. His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that suggested he'd seen this 1,000 times before. But this was my first, and I couldn't help feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. As the judge read off the docket, my eyes kept darting to the gallery. Tyler was watching me, not in the supportive way a brother should, but with the grin of someone waiting for a show. When our eyes met, he mouthed something, too quick to catch fully, but I caught the words, not fit. My chest tightened. Not fit. He'd been saying it for years, but now it wasn't about my choices, my life. Now it was about my children, about whether I deserved to be their mother. The first few minutes of testimony from Ryan's side felt like a blur. His attorney spoke about instability, about long absences, about how I struggled with reintegration after deployment. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. They weren't lies exactly, but they weren't the truth either. They were twisted fragments of my life, laid out like broken glass for strangers to step on. And then came the sound I dreaded, a laugh, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the courtroom's tension. My brother's laugh. The judge's eyes flicked up briefly, but he didn't comment yet. Ryan's attorney paused, as if feeding off the energy, then leaned into her argument with renewed confidence. Your Honor, we believe Zoe's history of service, while admirable on paper, has left her ill-equipped for the stability these children deserve. The words hit me harder than I expected. Admirable on paper, as if the years I spent overseas, the months of sleeping on cots, the sacrifices of birthdays and holidays, the weight of carrying letters from home in my chest pocket, that was just paper. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails digging into my palms, forcing myself not to react. Anger was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to snap, to prove their point. Mr. Bennett stood to respond, but before he could, Tyler leaned forward again, close enough for the whole row behind him to hear. Maybe if she spent less time playing soldier and more time being a mom, we wouldn't be here. The words sliced through me. I heard a few murmurs, even a stifled chuckle from the gallery. Heat rushed to my face, and for a second, I thought I might actually lose it. I turned slightly, locking eyes with him. His smirk widened. He was enjoying this, my pain, my humiliation. I wanted to stand up to shout, to tell the court about the nights I read my kids' bedtime stories over scratchy phone lines, the times I tucked letters into care packages with trembling hands, the way I carried pictures of them in my helmet pocket every single day. I wanted to scream that being a mom doesn't stop when you're deployed. It just looks different. But I stayed seated. My lawyer touched my arm, subtle but grounding, reminding me without words, not yet. The judge shifted uncomfortably, eyes narrowing toward the gallery. His gaze lingered on Tyler for a long moment, though he didn't speak. Not yet, but the silence was heavy, and I knew this wasn't over. I breathed in slowly, trying to steady myself. The courthouse clock ticked loudly, each second dragging like an eternity. My eyes drifted to the small American flag behind the judge's bench. Its edges still, no wind here to make it move. But for me, it moved in memory, images of desert nights, tents lit by lanterns, and the weight of boots sinking into sand. Those memories weren't just scars. They were proof that I'd endured, that I could endure this too. Still, as the morning unfolded, I realized this wasn't just about Ryan's lawyer trying to discredit me. This was about Tyler, sitting there, feeding the fire, trying to make me look smaller, weaker, unfit. And the worst part, it was working. The first recess was called, and people began to shuffle out. I stayed seated for a moment, gathering myself when Tyler passed by and muttered under his breath, "Should have stayed overseas. You don't belong here." I froze, my stomach twisting. But instead of breaking me, his words lit something inside. A spark. Because if there was one thing I knew from service, it was this. You don't walk off the field just because someone thinks you don't belong. You stay. You fight. You prove them wrong. And as I sat back, straightened my shoulders, and looked up at that flag again, I made a silent promise to myself. This courtroom wasn't going to break me. This was just the beginning. The judge's voice called everyone back to order after the short recess, and the shuffle of feet filled the courtroom once again. I sat taller in my chair this time, though my insides still trembled. Tyler had cut me deep with his whispered insult, but I refused to let him see me crumble. When the clerk announced that testimony would continue, Ryan's lawyer wasted no time. She stood gracefully, smoothing her suit jacket, and gave me a look that was equal parts pity and sharpness. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying through the room, "this case is not about disrespecting service to this country. It is about stability, reliability, and the emotional well-being of 2 young children." I swallowed hard. I knew what was coming. She tapped her papers with precision, then turned slightly toward the gallery, making sure her words landed where she wanted. "The respondent, Zoe, has a history that may seem noble on the surface, but extended deployments, long absences, and difficulty adapting back to family life have left scars that cannot be ignored." My chest tightened. Scars. She made it sound like my life was some permanent wound. Her voice lowered slightly, almost as if she wanted the juryless courtroom to lean in. Imagine being a child waiting for your mother, only to hear she won't be home for birthdays, school events, or holidays. These absences are not isolated. They define her record as a parent. I shifted uncomfortably, fighting the urge to jump in. My lawyer placed a hand near mine on the desk, steadying me again. He'd told me before, trust me to handle it. But as she spoke, each word felt like a knife twisting deeper. And then came the sound I dreaded most, a deliberate chuckle. Tyler. He wasn't even trying to hide it now. His shoulders shook as he leaned toward Ryan. Guess she was too busy being a soldier to be a mom. He muttered loudly enough for the row behind him to hear. The words rippled through the room like a pebble in water. A few heads turned. A couple of raised brows exchanged glances. I caught one woman shaking her head slowly, her lips pursed. Heat burned in my face. I bit the inside of my cheek, tasting iron, but stayed silent. The lawyer continued, almost feeding off Tyler's cruelty. And while we do not question Zoe's sense of duty in uniform, we must ask whether she can provide the constant presence and stability these children need now. The absence of a consistent maternal figure leaves lasting consequences. Her words blended with the faint scratching of pens, the shifting of papers, and the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. Suddenly, the judge's gavel came down again. Not as sharp as before, but firm. "Mr. Tyler," he said, eyes narrowing at my brother, "you will remain silent unless called upon." "You understand?" Tyler raised his eyebrows innocently, holding up his hands as though he'd done nothing. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, but the smirk never left his face. The judge's gaze lingered for a moment longer before turning back to the attorneys. "Proceed." Ryan's lawyer, unfazed, picked up right where she left off. "Your Honor, we also submit that Zoe's reentry after deployment has been marked by difficulty. Medical notes indicate bouts of sleeplessness and anxiety. While understandable given her history, we must consider the impact on the children." The mention of my medical records sent a cold chill down my spine. I hadn't expected her to pull that thread, not this soon. I clenched my hands in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Mr. Bennett finally rose. His voice was calm but carried authority. "Your Honor, while my learned colleague attempts to paint these notes as instability, I will remind the court that seeking help is not weakness. It is strength. And Zoe has consistently sought balance between her service, her health, and her children. That is responsibility, not negligence." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting his words wash over me like a bomb. For the first time that day, I felt like someone was truly defending me. Still, the damage lingered. I could sense the judgment in the room, the way strangers absorbed every word, every whisper. It wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was my whole identity being pulled apart, dissected, and displayed like some public trial of character. I stole a glance at Tyler again. He wasn't looking at me now. He was staring down at his phone, scrolling, his grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. To him, this wasn't about the kids or my stability. This was entertainment, a show. My humiliation was his punchline. The next witness was called, a school administrator who had interacted with my children during the months after my last deployment. I braced myself. She walked in with a stack of notes, her expression professional. She spoke of my children's adjustment, mentioning moments of restlessness, how one of them had struggled with separation anxiety when I first came home. My stomach twisted hearing it aloud, though I knew it was true. I remembered those nights, sitting by their beds, holding their hands, whispering that I wasn't leaving again anytime soon. Ryan's lawyer seized on it instantly. Would you say the children displayed a pattern of distress linked to their mother's absences? She asked. The administrator hesitated, glancing between us. I would say they experienced a difficult adjustment. Yes. But that is not unusual for children after a parent has been away for extended periods. I exhaled, quietly grateful for her honesty. Still, the nuance was lost in the way Ryan's attorney framed it, using every pause, every phrase to build her case. Tyler muttered again, this time louder. Should have thought of that before running off to play soldier. This time, the judge slammed his gavel harder. Mr. Tyler, one more interruption, and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Do you understand? The entire room froze. Tyler's smirk faltered, if only for a second. Yes, Your Honor, he replied again, quieter this time. I caught his eyes, and for the briefest moment I saw something flicker there. Not shame, never that, but maybe discomfort. Being called out publicly wasn't his style. He preferred quiet digs, ones no one else challenged. But now the judge had placed him under a spotlight, and he couldn't hide. The rest of the testimony carried on, each moment dragging fresh wounds into view. Every statement felt like salt rubbed into places I had tried to heal privately, and yet, for all the pain, there was a strange strength building inside me too, because for every jab, every sneer, every twisted narrative, I knew the truth. I wasn't perfect. I had missed birthdays. I had cried alone in barracks, wishing I could be home. I had fought battles overseas while my children were learning to ride bikes without me there to cheer. Those wounds were real, and hearing them dragged out in public was like being forced to bleed in front of strangers. But I also knew the part they weren't telling, the part no lawyer's paper could capture. The nights I recorded bedtime stories and sent them across the ocean. The way I saved every scrap of their drawings in my duffel bag. The way my first thought, every single morning, was of them. And as painful as it was to sit there, hearing my life reduced to a list of absences and flaws, I felt a quiet certainty growing stronger. They could twist my scars. They could laugh at my service. But they couldn't erase the truth of who I was. And that truth was going to matter more than they realized. The air in the courtroom hung heavy, so still that even the faint hum of the old ceiling fan above seemed like an intrusion. My brother's laughter still echoed in my ears, each word of his mockery ringing sharper than the last. The smirk he had worn moments ago burned in my mind, that cruel twist of his lips when he had belittled my service, my sacrifices, my very life. For a moment, I felt the heat rise to my face, shame and anger mingling in a storm I could hardly contain. And then it came. The judge's gavel cracked against the wooden block with a force that silenced every whisper. Enough. Judge Harlan's voice boomed, low but commanding, like a sound that carried more weight than mere volume. My brother, still leaning back casually in his chair, jerked upright as though he had been slapped. I didn't move, though my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said, fixing my brother with a stare that could pin a person to the wall, you will remember that this is a court of law, not a stage for mockery. One more word out of line, and I will hold you in contempt. The entire room seemed to shift. Even my ex-husband's attorney cleared his throat nervously, lowering his eyes to his notes. My brother blinked rapidly, his smirk faltering, but I knew him too well. He hated being told what to do, hated being silenced. I drew in a breath, steadying myself. For once, it wasn't me having to defend my honor. It was someone else, the one person in the room with authority, who had stepped in. A small, fragile spark of hope flickered inside me. But Judge Harlan wasn't finished. Mrs. Harris, he turned his gaze toward me. Please continue. His tone softened slightly, but his eyes stayed sharp, making sure the balance of power had shifted. I cleared my throat, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with each word. Your Honor, I didn't serve my country for medals or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And while I was overseas, I missed birthdays, family dinners, and quiet nights at home. I missed years I'll never get back. I sacrificed those things for people like my brother to live freely here. The silence was absolute, not even a pen scratched against paper. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, and for the first time, I didn't shy away. My brother snorted softly, but before he could speak, the judge's hand lifted, palm flat, warning him without a word. The sight almost made me smile. Almost. Judge Harland leaned forward. Service deserves respect. That is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of fact. His gaze swept the courtroom, landing on my brother again. And this court will not tolerate attempts to humiliate someone for fulfilling their duty. The words settled over me like a protective shield, something I hadn't realized I'd been craving all these years. To finally have my worth acknowledged. And not just by anyone, but by someone who commanded the room, meant more than I could express. But my brother wasn't one to stay quiet for long. He shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests as he leaned forward. Your Honor, with all due respect, she's exaggerating. She wants sympathy. She's playing the hero card. And frankly, the gavel slammed again, louder this time. The sound vibrated through my chest. Mr. Caldwell, the judge barked, not another word. You are here as a witness, not a performer. If you cannot control your tongue, I will have you removed. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even my ex-husband turned his head sharply toward my brother, eyes wide, as though silently begging him to stop before he destroyed their case entirely. I looked at my brother, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before: hesitation, maybe even fear. His jaw clenched, but his shoulders sank slightly back into his chair. He didn't speak. The judge turned his attention back to me, his expression softening just enough to let me know the floor was mine again. Please continue, Mrs. Harris. Speak freely. I nodded, though my throat was tight. Thank you, Your Honor. My hands trembled slightly as I clasped them together, but my words grew stronger. I am not here to play the hero card. I am here because my child deserves to know their mother stood tall when it mattered most, both in service and here in this room. A murmur of approval swept through the small gallery behind me. I didn't dare turn to see who it was, but I felt the energy shift. I wasn't just a woman fighting her brother's insults anymore. I was a mother standing for her child, and that struck a chord. The judge nodded slowly. Noted. The record will reflect this testimony. As the clerk typed quickly, I caught my brother fidgeting out of the corner of my eye. His face was red now, not from pride, but from the sting of being silenced. He leaned toward my ex-husband, whispering furiously, but the judge's sharp glance in their direction shut him down before it could escalate further. In that moment, I realized something. For years, I had let my brother's voice drown out mine, his criticism, his constant belittling, his sharp tongue. But here, under the weight of the judge's command, his voice no longer held the same power. For the first time, mine did. The courtroom, once hostile, now felt like a place where my truth was finally being heard. The shift wasn't just in the atmosphere. It was inside me too. My hands steadied. My voice didn't waver. And when I spoke again, I didn't just tell my story. I owned it. I lost friends overseas. I said quietly, my voice carrying despite its softness. People who never got the chance to come home. If I can stand here today, it's because they can't. And I won't let anyone, family or not, mock what that means. A thick silence followed, the kind that pressed against your chest. Even the judge leaned back, his stern face unreadable, but his eyes held respect. "Duly noted," he said finally, his gavel tapping once, lighter this time, as though sealing the moment into the record. I exhaled, long and slow, the weight lifting just slightly from my shoulders. For once, it wasn't about winning or losing the case. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my truth in front of the very people who had tried to strip it from me. The judge's command had not just silenced my brother. It had awakened something in me, something that could not be mocked, belittled, or broken again. And as the proceedings moved forward, I sat taller, knowing that the tide had turned. The gavel's echo faded, leaving a fragile silence in its wake. I sat taller, my breath steady, my pulse still racing, but not from fear anymore. For once, I wasn't shrinking under the weight of my brother's words. I had spoken, the judge had recognized me, and the air itself seemed to have shifted in my favor. But the calm didn't last. Across the table, my ex-husband leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently. Papers rustled, quick and nervous, like dry leaves in the wind. My brother's jaw was tight, his lips pressed thin as though he were chewing on the bitterness of being silenced. I could feel it. The storm hadn't passed. It had only been forced underground, waiting to erupt. Judge Harland adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping the room before settling back on me. "Mrs. Harris, do you have anything further you wish to add at this time?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, my ex-husband's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, voice polished but edged with unease. "The defense would like to submit additional testimony. We believe it will shed light on the petitioner's credibility." Credibility. The word hit me like a slap. I glanced at my attorney, who frowned but gave a small nod, urging me to stay calm. Still, my stomach tightened, a knot forming that made it hard to breathe. I had seen this tactic before. When they couldn't attack your truth directly, they tried to bury it under shadows and half-truths. "Proceed," Judge Harland said, his tone clipped, cautious. The defense attorney cleared his throat, straightening his tie, as if rehearsing authority. "We have reason to believe Mrs. Harris has not been entirely forthcoming about her time away. While she speaks of sacrifice and honor, there are records that suggest otherwise." My blood ran cold. Records. My mind scrambled. Had they dug through my past, twisted something out of context, unearthed something private that had nothing to do with custody or this case? "What records?" Judge Harland asked, his voice flat but commanding. The attorney lifted a folder, the papers inside thick and worn. He opened it deliberately, like a magician preparing a trick. Deployment logs, medical evaluations, and disciplinary reports. A sharp breath escaped me before I could stop it. My brother's eyes lit up, cruel satisfaction gleaming as though Christmas had come early. "Objection," my attorney said firmly, rising to his feet. "Your Honor, unless these documents are directly relevant to Mrs. Harris's capacity as a parent, they are nothing more than character assassination." The judge held up his hand. "Objection noted, but the court will hear the claim before ruling on its relevance." The folder opened wider. The defense attorney's voice lowered, carrying a tone of false gravity. "It appears that during her service, Mrs. Harris was temporarily relieved of duty following an incident overseas. The report cites exhaustion, insubordination, and an inability to follow direct orders in a high-pressure environment." The words sliced through me, each one reopening wounds I had buried deep. Gasps rippled across the room. My brother leaned forward, practically glowing with vindication. "Told you," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for those around him to hear. Heat rushed to my face. I could feel the old shame threatening to rise, the memory of that dark chapter clawing its way out of the shadows. But I wouldn't let it consume me, not here, not now. I stood slowly, steadying my voice even as my heart hammered. Your Honor, may I respond? Judge Harlan nodded, his gaze steady, inviting me to speak. I drew in a breath. Yes, that report exists. And yes, I was relieved of duty temporarily. But let me tell you why. The courtroom leaned in a collective pause, holding its breath. It wasn't insubordination. It wasn't weakness. It was humanity. I had been in combat zones for months without rest, watching friends fall around me, carrying weight, physical and emotional, that no person should carry alone. One night, I questioned an order because it would have risked innocent lives. For that, I was written up. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, but I kept going, my words sharp now, deliberate. I took the right up. I carried it. And when I returned to duty, I did so stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever. If they want to twist that into proof that I am unfit to be a mother, let them try. Because if protecting lives, if standing up when something felt wrong, counts as a flaw, then I'll own that flaw proudly. The silence that followed was deafening. My throat burned, my hands trembled, but I didn't look away. The judge's eyes narrowed, studying me as though weighing more than just my words. My brother shifted uncomfortably, clearly thrown off by my refusal to crumble. Finally, Judge Harlan spoke. The court recognizes that military service is complex, and records alone do not tell the full story. Mrs. Harris, your explanation will be entered into the record. He turned toward the defense attorney. Unless you can prove direct relevance to the custody at hand, we will not pursue this line further. The attorney hesitated, clearly defeated, then closed the folder with a sharp snap. A slow breath left my lungs, relief mingling with exhaustion. But inside, I knew this wasn't just about court anymore. The truth I had carried, hidden, buried, twisted by others, was out in the open now. And instead of breaking me, it had strengthened me. Still, I could feel the sting. Old wounds had been dragged into the light, exposed for strangers to judge. But maybe, just maybe, some truths couldn't stay buried forever. Because sometimes the only way to take their power away was to speak them aloud. And in that moment, as the courtroom shifted uneasily and my brother's glare burned holes into me, I realized something important. The past didn't own me anymore. I did. The silence in the room seemed heavier than the walls themselves. Papers still lay scattered across the floor where they had fallen, evidence unmasked at last. But silence did not mean peace. It was the stillness before a verdict, a calm that trembled with suppressed storms. I sat there, hands resting against the edge of the table, my breath uneven, eyes fixed on the truth that could no longer be denied. The very weight of it pressed against my chest. For so long, I had imagined this moment would come with shouting, maybe even vengeance. Instead, it came softly, without grandeur, yet sharp enough to cut deep. Across from me, the others shifted in their seats. No one dared to speak first. The air between us was thick, tangled with guilt, questions, and the unmistakable edge of fear. Justice had arrived, not with trumpets or gavel strikes, but with undeniable, irrefutable presence. "Say something," I whispered, my voice quieter than I intended. It wasn't a demand. It was exhaustion laid bare. The eldest among them finally raised his eyes, and for a flicker of a second, I saw something human there, shame, perhaps, or recognition of the end. His lips trembled, but no words came. I leaned forward, steadying myself on my elbows. You don't have to admit it out loud. It's already here. The truth doesn't ask for permission to breathe. He flinched at that, as though my words alone were shackles binding him to the reality he had tried so long to bury. Another pair of eyes darted toward the window, as though escape might be possible, but the night outside was as unyielding as the silence inside. I remembered every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every time I had been told to move on, to forget. But justice does not forget. It waits. Patient, quiet, enduring. You built walls of lies, I said softly, but walls crack. And when they do, what's buried inside crawls back into the light. No one replied, but the tremor in their breathing gave me all the answers I needed. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, marking each second like a hammer striking nails into the coffin of their denials. Morning arrived with a pale, muted sun that seemed almost reluctant to rise. I had not slept. My eyes burned from fatigue, but my resolve was sharper than ever. Today was not about noise. Today was about closure. I gathered the documents, sliding them neatly into a folder. Each page was a thread, and together they wove a fabric no blade of denial could cut. I pressed my palm against the folder, steadying myself as though the truth within it thrummed with its own heartbeat. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp, the kind that cuts clean through lungs and wakes every nerve alive. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet where even footsteps sounded like confessions. I carried the folder close, not as a weapon, but as something sacred. The courthouse was not grand, just brick and stone, weathered with years of stories it had already swallowed. But walking up those steps, I felt taller, heavier, steadier. My shoes echoed against the marble floor as I entered, and the echo followed me like a shadow, reminding me that silence itself can carry power. Inside, people bustled, voices murmuring in corners, papers rustling like restless spirits. I found my place, my chair, my moment. They arrived too, faces pale, shoulders tight, eyes betraying sleepless nights. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by something brittle. They avoided my gaze, but I could feel the weight of their awareness pressing against me. When the time came, I stood. My voice did not tremble, though my hands felt ice cold. I spoke not of vengeance, not of bitterness, but of truth. I let the documents speak louder than any accusation could, each page laid out, each word undeniable. The room listened. Even the walls seemed to lean in. When I was done, silence returned, but this silence was different. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was final. The verdict did not thunder down. It was delivered plainly, simply, as though justice had no need for dramatics. But its weight was immeasurable. Guilty. The word did not echo. It sank deep. It did not raise my voice in triumph, nor theirs in protest. Instead, it left a stillness that felt like the first breath after drowning. I looked at them, those who had once seemed untouchable, unshakable. They sat there, diminished, stripped of the false armor they had worn for so long. For once, the room did not belong to them. It belonged to truth. As they were led away, one of them looked back at me. There was no hatred, no venom, just recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that the game was over, that justice, though patient, had always been inevitable. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in destruction, only relief in knowing that what was broken had been named, faced, and answered. That night, I walked home under a sky painted with fading stars. The air carried the scent of rain, though none had fallen yet. Each step felt lighter, though my body was heavy with exhaustion. When I reached my door, I paused. The world outside was still full of noise, full of chaos, full of stories yet to be told. But here, in this moment, there was quiet, not empty quiet, fulfilling quiet. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and let the night air cool my skin. For the first time in years, I did not feel the weight of questions pressing on my chest. There was no need to dig anymore, no need to chase shadows. Justice had come, not loud, not vengeful, but final. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The silence around me was no longer heavy. It was freedom, simple and profound. And that was enough. When the courtroom finally emptied and the echo of footsteps faded into silence, a strange calm settled over the air. For the first time in years, the weight that had been pressing down on every breath seemed lighter. Justice had been spoken, not in a way that demanded cheers or loud celebration, but in a manner that carried the weight of permanence, quiet, undeniable, and final. The truth had been laid bare, and though the scars of the past would not vanish, they no longer carried the same power to haunt. The protagonist, standing in that stillness, realized something profound. Justice is not always thunderous. It does not always arrive with a roar or a flood of applause. Sometimes it arrives like a steady flame, small, unwavering, impossible to extinguish. Looking back at the faces in the courtroom, the judge who spoke with unflinching authority, the onlookers who gasped as buried truths surfaced, the adversaries who were left speechless, the protagonist saw the story of endurance. Every wound, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had led to this. It was not just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming dignity, silencing falsehoods, and proving that truth, no matter how deeply hidden, cannot be buried forever. There was no need for vengeance now. The silence itself carried victory. Those who had wronged could no longer disguise themselves with masks of respectability. Their reputations, carefully crafted for years, had cracked in public view. The protagonist, however, did not smile in triumph. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, an understanding that real strength lies not in destruction but in survival, in walking forward with a clear conscience and an unshakable truth. As the sun dipped behind the courthouse, casting long golden shadows, the world outside seemed unchanged. Cars still passed, people hurried about their lives, conversations buzzed in the distance. Yet, within, something had shifted permanently. The past no longer held chains. The future no longer seemed unreachable. Justice had come, quiet but final. And in that quietness lay the most powerful truth of all: peace.